In this film, we're going to talk to one of the world's leading breathwork experts, Richie Bostock, about why it's one of the most powerful tools we've got to manage long COVID as a condition. Adding the medical perspective on the discussion are Dr. Tamsin Lewis and Dr. Asad Khan, and it's worth staying to the end for a short introductory exercise from Richie, which might just show you what you've been missing.
Richie, could you briefly just tell us a bit about your background?
Well, I wasn't always teaching people how to breathe for a living. It's not something that people will usually come out of university or try and do a university degree in. I actually started my professional life in the corporate world, working in one of the big consulting firms. Worked there for about 6 years, left that and ended up moving to Asia and working in the world of digital entrepreneurship for a few years. But it was around that transition of moving and shifting careers that my family was rocked with some pretty bad news. And that was that my dad was diagnosed with MS. And so through my research to try and work out what can help him, that's how I came to the Wim Hof method for the first time. And the Wim Hof method, as Tam explained, is a breathing technique, but also couples it with cold exposure. So in a daily life, it might be something as simple as just taking a cold shower every day. And this was my first experience with breath work and what the possibilities of it are. And I ended up traveling to Poland and doing a week-long Wim Hof retreat, in the middle of winter, hiking around in your shorts and your pants, -3 degrees outside in the snow, swimming around in the ice water, climbing the tallest mountain in Poland, just in your shorts, -19 degrees at the top, really just having quite a profound experience as to what actually we are capable of as human beings. But all the cold stuff aside, what actually blew me away was the breath work that we did. We would every morning go into the basement of the hotel where we were staying and do these breathing techniques for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And just have these absolutely profound experiences, whether it was just moving into those beautiful states of peace and calm and equanimity to, emotional cathartic releases, or even just experiencing elevated emotions of just deepest joy and love, just not knowing that these were all possible just by breathing, which is quite profound. But that was really what kickstarted me into thinking what is possible with the breath. What else are people doing with the breath? This is something that we all have. Every single human being on this earth has the capability to access. So what is possible with this tool? And that led me all over the world to learn from all sorts of different people, all who approach the breath in different ways with different lenses, but all with this single idea in mind that we can do something just by breathing. So whether they were, breathwork masters, yogis, psychologists, university researchers, doctors, physiotherapists, elite athletic coaches, all sorts of different people who all use the breath to create a different benefit. And now this is what I get to share and what I get to teach. And I'm very excited to do it.
Thank you.
So Richie, for people who are just coming into this fairly cold, like I would have done, before I had COVID, I would be like breath work. I mean, how is that different to the breathing I do normally? What is it and what does it do and what's the point of it? In the most simple terms for people who maybe are just coming to this for the first time.
Of course. And actually, I even think that word breath work is quite a confusing one, because it's like, breath work, do I actually need to work on my breathing? Didn't I just do it and then I stop when I'm dead, basically? But what a lot of people don't realize is actually how from breath to breath, the way that you're breathing is actually making changes to what's happening inside of you. And vice versa. What's happening inside of you, particularly from a mental, emotional perspective, is changing your breath, literally from breath to breath. And we take somewhere between 17 to 29,000 breaths per day. And not many people are aware of actually how much your breathing is affecting you. Although I feel like this is changing, and perhaps it took a respiratory virus to get people to think about their breathing as something that's maybe sort of important. But yeah, so breath work itself is really any time that you become aware of your breathing and then start to change it to create some sort of physical, mental, or emotional benefit for yourself. And that is quite a broad definition, because it is actually a very broad scope of work. It can be as simple as using your breath in a reactive moment when you're feeling stressed to calm down your nervous system. Takes as little as a couple of minutes, to using your breath in more involved ways to improve, let's say, athletic performance or improve recovery, or even to, change various physiological symptoms in your body or improve various physiological symptoms, to emotional therapy work, to, spiritual experiencing and voyaging. There's really so many different ways that you can use the breath. And that's what's so exciting, is we all have it. As long as you have one working nostril, a mouth, and at least one working lung, then you're good to go.
It's definitely true. And that was my experience. But I think, there's a range, as you said, of breathwork, and there's a range of expertise out there. And it can, as I've seen through my time out here working with different breathwork practitioners, it can go wrong sometimes. So it's important to work with someone that potentially goes gently. But let's bring it back to long COVID, because, that's why everyone's kind of here, and how it can be helpful. And, Jez, you can give a bit of your experience. I know, because I was new to, I wasn't new to breath work, but I have used it through long COVID, where my lungs really didn't work. I know your lungs weren't as affected as mine, but I think getting the diaphragm and retraining the breath was really helpful. I also think the nervous system reset that breath work can encourage. So that's in terms of, there's a lot of muscular tension held in the rib cage, etc., and around the costochondral joints. And I think breathwork itself, by increasing the blood flow, can really help there. But I think for me, it's the emotional release, and that really helps with breathwork. But also, thinking more about long COVID being a trauma for many people, right? It literally is a shock to the nervous system. And I know that could be seen as a sort of airy-fairy way of just, describing long COVID, but it really, for many people suffering, almost PTSD symptoms from long COVID because of the lack of knowledge around it, the hospitalization, the multiple medical tests, that is a trauma. And I think working with a breath worker and someone that can help release some of that nervous system tension it can be really profound. That was certainly my experience. But Jez, I know you came across breath work as a result of, indirectly, my influence by introducing you to someone who I was introduced to by Richie. So it all comes back to Richie here. That really helped you with some of that nervous system tension. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I found that, and I think something else that happened around the same time was reading about the work that Dr. Petrino was doing out in Mount Sinai, where he discovered that the majority of long haulers had basically weird breathing. They were breathing too shallowly. They didn't have enough end-tidal CO2. And this is obviously some manifestation of, dysautonomia, essentially. And I thought, is it possible that I'm also breathing weird without having realized it? And there's two aspects, I think, in which the breath work helped me from this sort of point. And one of them was just trying to do 5 or 10 minutes of it before I went to sleep, just to try and calm my body down out of whatever state it had got itself into during the day. And I would find I would sleep much better through the night if I managed to do that. My heart rate would drop. And then increasingly trying to do it during the day as well. Where anytime I felt like I had overexerted or I'd been on the go too long, to sit down and actually do some breath work, lie down, do some breath work, and heart rate would suddenly come down from whatever it was doing, 90, 100 or whatever at rest, down to something more normal. It clearly was very, very effective at doing that and actually getting the nervous system back into line, which has all sorts of beneficial consequences as well, because your body isn't trying to fight and flight the whole time. You might be resting, digesting, and healing a little bit, which is kind of useful sometimes. And then the secondary part of breathwork that was incredibly helpful for me was the emotional release side of stuff. And that was with a practitioner called Lena, who works with Sam, who's an incredible, I've mentioned it before on the channel, incredible osteopath and acupuncturist. And the work there was more, breath work was more about the emotional release. And for me, the trauma that, you mentioned, Tam, wasn't so much the sort of the physical stuff. I think it's the trauma of being ill and the trauma it's had on your life and the life change that long COVID has enacted on it, and the grief that you have for all the things that you can no longer do, and the anger that you feel towards the illness and towards yourself and towards also, there's all sorts of emotions that long COVID creates because of the drastic impact it has on your life. And you have to let go of some of that tension, because otherwise you're just tied up in, again, it's another thing that just ties you up in this tight knot and increases this nervous system malfunction, in my opinion. And I found sort of that those longer terms of one-to-one sessions with a breath work are incredibly productive for emotional release and getting there. And I know Asad can probably talk to that too. And then maybe Richie, if you could maybe talk about why that works.
Of course.
Yeah, totally.
Asad, can I say one thing? Because I think it's really important to frame what you're going to say as well. I think coming from a medical background, and clearly you as a respiratory consultant as well, like people will be sitting here thinking this all sounds very well and good, but we've got a disease. Like, how does breathing or the retraining our breathing and all this emotional how does that affect a disease process?
Yes, I mean, I was actually going to touch on that anyway, because I think it's really important that people who are watching this don't think, well, this is another one of those videos that is asking us to think our symptoms away. And whenever we have talked about a technique that isn't a pill, then we have had that sort of feedback. But I'm sure Richie will expand on this, but this is producing physiological changes inside our body that are having effect on our internal organs. And particularly in my case on, I would say, my autonomic nervous system. I mean, Jez and I are quite similar in terms of how our disease has presented with the fatigue and with the dysautonomia. I have crippling POTS. My heart rate can be 140, 150 at times. But since I started the breath work, nothing is as effective as that at bringing it down to a tolerable level. I can actually bring it down to the 60s now with my own practice. And that's just through regular breath work and meditation. And the emotional release as well. Having this disease, even if you're not hospitalized, is traumatic because it's like a bereavement, as is any other chronic disabling condition, where you go from this person who was high functioning, had an on the shop floor job, 12 hours a day, in our cases, looking after other people, being physically active, also having a life at home, to being somebody who's just in bed and can just about wash and dress yourself, and that goes on and on and on for months. It's hugely traumatizing, and I can say hand on heart that if it wasn't for breath work and mindfulness, I would not have reached the level of acceptance that I have got now, 9 months into my illness, if I hadn't been introduced to these techniques through Jez. So I still don't fully understand how all of it works, but certainly, the effects on the sympathetic nervous system and on the release of that trauma that you sustained due to the illness and also pre-existing life experiences, that has been phenomenal. And perhaps, Richie, you could expand on what breathwork actually does to your physiology.
Of course. Well, both, I just want to really just say a big thank you to all of you for all your sharings, and just being so open and vulnerable with what you've experienced, because of course, whenever we move into the world of emotion, it's not always easy to talk about. So I really just want to honor you guys for doing that. So let's talk a little bit about, but maybe what we can do right now is focus on a lot of the emotional release work we've been talking about, because again, breath work, very broad. Let's zone in a little bit. So when it comes to what we call integrative breathwork sessions that you guys have been having and people all over the world are experiencing as well, typically has a few things in common with, there's many different types, let's just say, but they all have generally a few things in common. And one of them is what we call superventilation, or another way to talk about it is controlled hyperventilation. So quite often breathing through the mouth a little faster and a little deeper than you would usually breathe. So this actually has multiple effects on your physiology, one of which is a reduction of carbon dioxide in your blood. And what carbon dioxide is acts as a vasodilator in your blood. So if you have more, it's going to open up your blood vessels. If you have less, it's going to constrict them. So if you're blowing out carbon dioxide, slowly going into a state that we call hypercapnia, then you're actually starting to create a light restriction in your blood vessels. Now, in some ways that might sound a little bit weird or a little bit scary, like, is that a good thing to do? But it's perfectly safe and it's perfectly okay. And you can, breathe this way for hours and hours and hours on end, and it'd be totally fine. If you were doing it 24/7 every single day of the week, maybe you'd start to have some issues. But just for a short period of time, it's perfectly fine and perfectly okay. Now, what this actually does is this constriction is particularly evident in your brain. So we start talking about the blood vessels in your brain. And it's almost as though it starts to slowly slow down the resources that are being accessed by your brain. And what that means is the brain goes, okay, it's time to make sure that we survive here. We don't want to. So what we might start to do is turn down the parts of the brain that aren't so useful for survival, just to keep the body running. And of course, what happens is that the higher cognitive centers start to slowly quieten down a little bit. So specifically the PFC, prefrontal cortex. And what that allows then is a greater accessibility to what's underneath that, what's underneath the conscious mind. And this is where we start to look at the limbic system. This is when we start to look at what are we holding on to emotionally, what's encoded in there. And that is obviously then the seat of being able to access the autonomic and central nervous system in the rest of our body, where we might also hold other tension, where we might hold other stress, other trauma. So it's as though we are taking the lid off the jar and we're able to see what's inside and actually get to it. And so much of the time, whenever we experience things that are emotionally traumatic, we lock up, we go into our fight or flight or freeze response. And in most scenarios these days, where we're not necessarily allowed in many cases to be able to run away from something or fight something off in a very physical sense, so many people go into their freeze response automatically. Lock up, hold it in, don't show the emotion, don't act, just. And what actually happens then is we not only tense our bodies, but we stop breathing. If you think about when you're trying to hold in crying, what do? You hold it in. If you're trying to stop yourself from laughing, the exact opposite. What do? You literally hold your breath. And the breath is a very natural mechanism for us to be able to process motion when it becomes overwhelming. So if we're not allowing our body to use this natural mechanism that it's supposed to use to be able to work through emotion, then it's not going to get processed in the right way. It gets stored, it gets remembered in some way throughout our nervous system, throughout our limbic system, and it acts there and affects us unconsciously in our behavior and also within the systems inside of us. So, so many people, I guarantee you, are working from a mildly sympathetically stimulated place all the time. And it might not just be because they have busy schedules or a busy, hectic work life or whatever it is. It might be because of that thing that happened to them when they were 7 years old that they haven't been able to process. They haven't given the body the opportunity to know that it is safe. So this is what this type of breath work presents an opportunity, is to be able to essentially do a little bit of digging, find out what's there, and to be able to process it in a very safe way, knowing that I'm in a safe environment, being looked after by somebody. The story has a happy ending. I'm here, I'm alive. And it allows us to close that loop of trauma.
Great. I love that. Love the way that you described that. Asad, do you want to comment?
Yes. I mean, I would just say that the changes in acid-base balance that you're describing are absolutely fundamental and rooted in physiology. Therefore, it's no surprise that the changes your body experiences are so profound, because there are actually very few ways to manipulate your acid-base balance. It's very stable, unless you ingest acid or alkali or become seriously ill. Your acid-base balance is pretty homeostatic. So, Richie, can I just ask you, in what other conditions would you say breathwork is the most useful?
Oh, that is a tricky question there, Asad, because I've just seen it been so useful in so many ways. And I'll use my dad as an example, actually. So I came across breathwork in the first place to try and help my dad diagnosed with MS. And through his implementation of breathwork daily, cold showers daily, that kind of forms the Wim Hof method aspect of what he was doing, added with a change in diet as well, has meant that from the moment he started this program, the progression of his MS completely stopped in its tracks. And, I've shared this story quite a few times in various places. And so people are trying it, and it's not just MS, whether it's other autoimmune issues as well, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, what have you. It seems to be very, very useful for people who have autoimmune issues. People, for example, who might struggle with various other respiratory issues, for example, asthma, there's a lot of really interesting work being done around the trauma basis, the emotional trauma basis of asthma, resulting in a chronic hypercapnic state that causes the stiffening of the smooth muscle in the airways. And so there's lots of really interesting work around that. What I find really fascinating is, there's some brilliant work being done by a man called Dr. Gabor Mate, who is really striving hard to understand the correlations between physical symptom, disease, and illness, and the potential emotional bases there are for it. And he's done a pretty good job by examining a lot of, very clear research and evidence-based research and case studies showing these interesting combinations of personality type and trauma leading to certain diseases and symptoms and illness. So if breath can, help to sort of address some of those fundamental things that perhaps from an emotional basis we're holding on to, then who knows what kind of physical relief of symptoms it might present. But of course, there are many other things that the breath is useful to beyond the emotional piece. Some of the things you were sharing before around, feeling your heart rate go up to 140 and being able to bring it back down using your breath, that is so useful just every day for anybody who is struggling with whether it is a disease or just something as common as anxiety or panic attacks. I did have one person who came and did a breath session with me. Wasn't even a one-to-one. It was actually in a group setting. And she struggled from panic attacks daily, 2 or 3 a day. And after one session, she did not have a panic attack since. So it's really starting to understand, I think, to a greater degree, how your nervous system works. And there's no better way to have fun with your nervous system than with your breath, because it really does have such a correlation. Whether you change your breath, you change your nervous system. So if you start to understand what does what, how it affects it, now you have something that you can take control of that ultimately has flow-on effects on every single other part of your life, whether it's physically, mentally, or emotionally. So that's kind of exciting.
I think what I was going to just add is that some of the symptoms that a lot of people are experiencing with long COVID are related to inflammation. And we know that if you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the sort of, for want of a better word, for brain fog at this time of night, the sort of like the counterposer to the sympathetic, the fight and flight. So if you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the vagal nerve, etc., we know that signaling actually reduces inflammation in the body. So some of the symptoms that long haulers are experiencing, joint pain, headache, migraine, brain fog, all of those things that are related to inflammation can be improved by breath work. So there's that impact too, plus the effect on the serotonergic system, which can be indirectly impacted by the vagus nerve. So all of that is, it's proven science. We know that happens, and you can measure it. I measure it through the Aura Ring, for example. You can measure your parasympathetic nerve function. So all of this is certainly, all credible science that's underpinning it.
And there have been some great studies, sorry to jump in, but there have also been a couple of studies specifically around things like Wim Hof method, around how it can reduce the levels of inflammatory cytokines. So by breathing that way, seeing a reduction in IL-6, IL-8, and I think TNF alpha as well. So absolutely, that shift into the parasympathetic nervous system, triggering that relaxation and that restoration response, but also at a very direct level, working on your immune system to reduce inflammation.
Yes, I mean, I think these things are a challenge to medical thinking in the conventional sense. But I do look forward to the day when, we practice truly integrated medicine, where you've got a doctor, you've got a meditation coach, you've got a breathwork practitioner, all sort of on site. So that would be so good. And you can't bring your heart rate down from 140 to 70 in one go. It takes months of practice. Just thought I'd clarify that. So final thing from me really, unless anybody else wants to chat anything later, is that, I mean, how can those viewers of ours who perhaps can't afford to pay for sessions with a breathwork coach incorporate it into their lives? And perhaps you could just give a really brief demonstration of a practice right now.
Of course. Well, the easiest place to start truly is actually to seed into your awareness that breathing is kind of important and does affect you in some way. Because if you were able to sort of get your head around that fact, then maybe you'll actually start to pay attention to your breath throughout the day. Of course, we can do certain techniques here and there, but how you breathe for the other 23 and a half hours that you're alive throughout the day is also going to have a big effect on your physiology. So noticing how you are breathing throughout the day and how it actually makes you feel. So the first step of breathwork is always breath awareness, always going, okay, where am I at right now? And it might start in a very physical way where you just start to notice, okay, as I inhale, where do I feel movement in my body? Do I feel movement in my lower, in my sort of abdomen region? Do I feel it more in my rib cage, through my thoracic? Do I feel it up in my neck and my shoulders? Where is the movement? What's happening? How do I do this thing called breathing? And even beyond the physical, as soon as you start to pay attention, you might also start to notice certain qualities of the breath, for example. You might even start to notice that as you inhale, it feels a little bit jagged, or it feels a bit strained or sort of raspy. The exhale, you might notice various other things. Start to notice, what are the characteristics and quality of my breath? Because that then leads on to the next thing, which is actually, well, what is my nervous system trying to tell me right now with my breath? Because our breath is so intimately linked to our nervous system that it's going to be a direct reflection of where your nervous system is at. So if those sensations combine all the physical together, it gives you a sort of uneasy or a stressful or tight quality, then you go, okay, I know I'm a little bit wound up right now. Or if it feels beautiful, smooth, flowing, and easy, then you can say, okay, great. I know where my nervous system is at. So just starting to bring in a little bit of awareness and noticing. And if you actually want to go to the next step of starting to change your physiology with your breath, so taking control of your breath and using it as a tool, then we can start to do something very, very simple. And as a general rule of thumb, take this away, that if you're slowing down the breath, that is generally going to help you to relax, generally. If you start to speed up the breath, it's going to activate your nervous system. It's going to move you into a sympathetic response. So if you can play with those two principles to begin with, okay, I am feeling quite stressed out right now. I need to relax. Let me just close my eyes, perhaps, notice where my breath is at, and then start to slow it down. Maybe breathing in for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, maybe getting to 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. then that can straight away start to send signals to your nervous system and say, okay, everything is fine, I am safe. And you only need to repeat, let's say, a 5 seconds in, 5 second out breath for a minute, couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes if you have the time, for it to start to have a very measurable effect. This specific technique, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, is something called coherent breathing, which was, and there's been plenty of research done around how this can drastically shift heart rate variability in a very, very short amount of time. So just, yeah, that's a very easy takeaway, because I think for most people, rather than being underactivated, we're all a little bit overactivated. The pace of the world, a global pandemic, all these things, are going to really throw us off. And then, of course, if you're working with long COVID as well, then there's going to be that activation there as well. So being able to relax, slow things down, breathing a little slower in and out through the nose, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out for 2 to 3 minutes is a great place to start. Something that you can do just before bed as well to help you to sleep, to kind of wind down your nervous system, perhaps after a crazy day, or what it's like. So that's perhaps just a very easy place to start.
I've also been using the Flourish app, and I don't know if this is your app. Could you? Yes, okay, good. I know obviously you're talking in it and you're leading the breath work. I've found it incredibly helpful. I use it 2 or 3 times a day.
Wow.
Yeah. Just to wake up with and to calm myself down at nights. I've also had emotional release from some of the longer meditations in there as well. They've got me to a place where suddenly I've just been able to, for want of a better word, cry, and my whole body shakes and this emotion comes out. So from my experience, I haven't necessarily always needed to have a one-to-one session to be able to access that. And I think Asad may have had similar experiences too.
Yes, absolutely. I think, we must have been joined at the hip when we were born, because I think kickstarting with a sort of, a hands-on face-to-face session was really helpful as an introduction. But, in between those sessions, certainly I employ the Flourish app 2 or 3 times a day. And with the longer journeys, there is that same kind of uncontrollable emotional release, that kind of jerking at the end of exhalation, that's almost involuntary. And it's like the energy in your body is shifting. That's the only way I can describe it. And the way you feel afterwards, it's a lot lighter. It's almost like you've had a really good massage without having had one, and have had your head cleansed. So yeah, I think it's difficult to put a silver lining on having had long COVID, but I would say that I have learned so much from the tools that I've used to deal with this illness that, hopefully one day, even when the disease is gone, they're going to be a part of my life, and I'm sure I'm not the only one there.
Oh, Asad, that's really a powerful thing to say. And, there are never to ever discount anybody's suffering or anyone's experience. Of course, we always hold everyone's experience with the greatest compassion and empathy. But I can at least share with people that I know in my life and my clients that, quite often it's that dark night of the soul that leads to something absolutely brilliant. And it might take time, but I think the more patience that you can show with yourself, that, quite often these kinds of experiences are what will change you. And how is it going to change me? The cool thing these days is that with the unlimited information that we have out there in this world, ignorance is almost a choice. There's so much out there for you to be able to ingest and to try and to experience. And who knows how many times do you hear the story of, I had something really bad, but to be honest, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I had that really bad experience. That person broke up with me, but you know what? It was actually the best thing for me that I just didn't see it at the time. So we always treat ourselves with all the empathy and all the compassion that we can to go, yeah, you know what, this sucks. And, you know, I will give myself all the space I need to grieve and to feel all of that. Feel it, you know, that's the important thing. So, you know, I'm sure plenty of people who are suffering, you know, with long COVID, you know, they have busy lives, responsibilities, families, crazy jobs. And so we have to put on a brave face as much as we can. And you almost need to give yourself opportunity to undo that in some ways, to be able to be really vulnerable, to be really raw with yourself, and to express how you're feeling underneath. You know, but I'm so happy to hear you guys that the Flourish app has helped in some way. Yeah, it is my app, and you know, it has a lot of guided breath journeys on there for different reasons, for different purposes, to create different benefits and results for people. It is, you know, like you said, Asad, it's, you know, if you can get hands-on with somebody, it's definitely very, very beneficial. You know, there's nothing like hands-on bodies when it comes to this kind of work. But at the same time, whether it's you don't have access to anybody or you just want to do things in between the sessions, something digital like Flourish is a very, very good option, I think.
I agree. And I have to sort of just say that I don't want to come across as patronizing to any of our viewers. You know, we all go through the stages of grief, don't we? So there has been the anger, the sadness, the screaming into the dark night, you know, the thoughts of self-harm, you know, all of that does happen. And then, you know, the acceptance and the sort of seeing the silver linings that does come when it's your time. But there's something to be said for early adoption of these things, because I think it's been really helpful. So yeah, if you're able to, then if you could perhaps just take our viewers through a couple of minutes of practice, and then we shall take a leave.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I would just bring it on you.
Yeah. What would you like me to share? What will be useful for your viewers right now, do you think?
Well, I was going to say something that's a very something that gives them something they can practice themselves afterwards that just helps calm themselves down.
Let's definitely do that. One thing I would love to share is I would love for everyone to start to build a relationship with their breath. So what we're actually going to do is a little bit of an experiment together. And what that's going to look like is actually seeing what the difference is in how we feel, the sensation, and what we feel as qualities in our body when we breathe fast versus when we breathe slow. So you can actually experientially start to go, oh, wow, the things change. So we're going to do two different techniques then. One's going to be breathing a little bit faster, and one's going to be breathing a little slower. The first technique of breathing faster, let's just keep it super simple. Nice deep breath in through the nose. Nice forceful exhale through the mouth. So it goes a little something like this. So it's a nice punchy exhale. And then we're going to move into some slower breathing as well, which will be breathing in and out through the nose. So if you're going to be doing these techniques, I encourage you to do this in a safe place, preferably not driving or in water or operating any kind of machinery, on your couch, on your bed, on your sofa. And if you feel ready, you can even close your eyes. And what we're going to do together is just do a few seconds, maybe 20 seconds or so of this faster breathing, inhaling through the nose, nice big deep breath in, punchy exhale out through the mouth. So I invite you now to exhale out. And let's do this together. So in, out, nose, mouth. And keep that going at that pace. Nice big deep breaths if you can. And by now, you might be already starting to feel some things happening in your body, maybe feeling a bit of heat generating, feeling a bit buzzy, or feeling a tingling or some lightheadedness. Finishing the next breath you are on, just relax. Close your eyes and just let the breath come and go naturally. And take a little journey into your body and notice what sensation or change can you feel, if any? Now, sensation is the language of the body. It's how it tells us that something is going on or something is changing. So what do you feel? Maybe you feel a bit lightheaded or spacey. You feel a change in temperature. You feel your heart beating a little faster, perhaps. So we can sort of note, okay, this is what breathing fast does to me. And funnily enough, you can breathe that way for a really long time if you wanted to. But now we're just going to do the opposite. We're going to breathe a little slower now. So let's start by breathing in and out through our nose for a count of 5 in, count of 5 out. It's that coherent breathing I was telling you about before. So maybe just exhaling out through the nose, and I'll give you a little count. Here we go. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And continue yourself now counting to the count in your head. And just noticing how it feels to breathe in this way. Now, breathing slower, as I mentioned before, sends a signal to the body to relax, that it is safe, that it can rest. And what also helps when you do this technique is not to create any strain through your respiratory muscles when you breathe. And what I mean by that, as you continue to breathe nice and slow, is that quite often what happens is because it's a long inhale in and people aren't used to breathing like that, by the time they get to maybe count 4, they're at the top of their inhale and they don't feel like they can breathe in anymore. And it feels like there's a contraction through all those big breathing muscles. And then when they exhale, it's a nice long exhale. They get to count 4 or so, and then they feel like their lungs are completely empty and they can't exhale anymore. So they're sort of squeezing. So if from a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is completely full and 1 is completely empty, you want to be working at this sort of 8 to 3 range, where you're not overinflating your lungs, not feeling like you're having to tense or put in lots of effort when you inhale. And same with when you exhale. It doesn't feel like you're trying to wring out every last drop of air. You want to keep it smooth and soft and comfortable. This is something that often gets overlooked when you learn these kinds of breathing techniques. If you're trying to breathe to relax, then it only makes sense that all your muscles are going to be relaxed as well, not striving or trying to do too much. So if you would like now, you can even just finish the next breath you are on and notice what is happening in your body now. Let your breath come and go naturally. What do you feel as a sensation? Maybe notice your heart rate. What's your heart rate doing? How does your head feel? How does your chest feel? Even your belly, how does your belly feel? And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. And just know that that slower breathing technique is there for you anytime. So if we talk about relaxation, trying to bring your nervous system back into a place of balance, 5 counts in, 5 counts out, all through the nose, nice and slow, controlled, calm, and relaxed, is a very, very useful tool.
Thank you. Thank you. That was, that was really, really a great introduction to some techniques that people can practice at home. I'd also like to give a shout out to your book, which I am currently listening to because reading is challenging. So yeah, it's called Exhale. What else? And it's a fascinating read. So I'd encourage all of our viewers to have a look if they can. We'll link to it in the notes. Final words from you, Jazz?
Only that this is some of the most important stuff I have learnt in the last 18 months to help me deal with long COVID. This is possibly up there at number one, up over and above any sort of other intervention that might have happened or might have been done. This is the one I rely on the most and has made the biggest fundamental difference, not just to me being able to cope with the illness, but possibly also to my, I mean, I lurch desperately into woo-woo territory here when I say my growth as a human being, right? I think it's kind of made me a better person. And there are identifiable times in the last 18 months where I can tell I have behaved differently as a result of this, not just through a constant of being more at ease and more at peace with myself through the emotional release, but even in moments of high stress where I've been able to pull myself back when previously I might not have been able to. So it adds dimensionality to all sorts of aspects of your life. And I don't really want to say thank you to long COVID for making me aware of this and making me listen to you 3 times a day, Richie, but I am because it's been incredibly powerful. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And actually, I'm going to say this now. So when I'm better, I'm going to train as a breathwork coach. It's out there. You can all hold me to account.
There we go. Amazing, Asad. Well, I just want to share too, Jez, that, there's nothing woo-woo about growing as a human being, my friend, and that's what we're here to do on this planet, right? Every day, just taking little steps at a time. So, and for me, I can share my own personal journey too, that breath has been the number one thing. I dedicated my life to this work, and it's only because of the effect that it's had on me, the people around me, that I decided, this is too important not to share. So, but this is the thing, because it's breathing and it seems like almost too good to be true in some ways. So rather than think too much about it, everyone just go out and experience it in whatever way that you can. Just give it a go. It's just breathing. What you got to lose? So see what happens, and you might be surprised.
That was one of the most invigorating chats I've had so far for the channel, and I can't recommend trying breathwork more highly if you haven't already. It's great for managing dysautonomia, extremely good for your state of mind, and the increasing amount of evidence for hypoxia playing a key role in long COVID is the cherry on the cake. So, till next time.